Hello and welcome to the Hospitality Twins podcast. I'm Jerry Reyes.
And I'm Ramon Reyes. Tourism offers us an opportunity to visit new places and experience new and exciting attractions.
But it's the people within the hospitality industry that make these experiences unique and memorable.
We look forward to shedding light on the talented people who make the hospitality industry special.
And also to providing coaching and career tips to those seeking to join our industry. Well, we are happy to welcome Josh Robichaux to our podcast today. Josh is a general manager here in the city of New Orleans over at the Pontchartrain Hotel. One of the questions that general managers get asked often is, how did you get started in the industry? You know, what was your path in? We'd love to hear how you got your start in the industry. So if you wouldn't mind, take us back to how you started in this industry and how you've reached this level today as general manager.
And first, just let me start by saying thank you, Jerry and Ramon, for having me. I'm very thankful to be here, and I'm really impressed by what you guys are doing for our industry. That said, I started in the industry 20 years ago as a doorman at the Ritz-Carlton, New Orleans. Great experience. I believe that year was the year that we had national championship and Super Bowl all at the same time. So the tips were really, really good.
They probably were.
Right, and I really enjoyed it. But it did not take me long for me to recognize that I wanted something more. I started to look at the leaders at the Ritz-Carlton, New Orleans, and I just liked the way they dressed. I liked the way they moved. And I liked the influence that they had. Right, it was like, man, this is something I think I can make a career out of. And so I started to ask around, how can I get into leadership? And long story short, the advice that I got based on where I was at that time and the skill set that I had at that time was to try to get into the front office. And so I approached the front office manager. I expressed my interest. He told me he did not have a desk agent position available at the time, but he had a night auditor position available. And so he offered me the job. I accepted it. I did a pretty good job. Things were going good. And then tragedy happened. My dad passed away at that time. I was in my early 20s, and my mom was living on the East Coast at the time, and my stepdad was also very ill, and so he passed about 6 months later. And so within a very short period of time, I didn't have a real support network financially. And so the urgency for me to get into leadership really kicked in, right? And so I went back to my front office manager, and I told him I was very thankful, but I needed more. And he recognized that hunger and that passion and determination. And, I was good at what I did. And so he promoted me to supervisor. And I did that for some time, and that was great. But again, I wanted more. And so I wanted to get into management. And at that time, the process was, if you wanted to get into management in the rooms division, you needed housekeeping. And so I applied for the housekeeping supervisor position. I did not get the first one. I was disappointed. But not long after, they posted the second position, and I applied again. I got it. And, the guy who got it before me was a really nice guy, but I was frustrated that he got it first. And so I really wanted to compete hard, right? To show I should have been the one to get it first. We had a good, competitive, brother-like relationship, if you will. And that was a great experience in housekeeping. And the front office manager went on to become hotel manager at the Iberville Suites. And so I'm not sure if you guys remember, but back then the Ritz-Carlton complex had 3 hotels in one building. So, right, the Ritz-Carlton was the 5 Diamond at the time. Maison Orleans was a boutique. It would have been 6 Diamond if that was a thing. And then Iberville Suites was your 4 Diamond property. And so the front office manager, who went on to become the hotel manager, asked me if I wanted to be his assistant ops manager. And so I was like, heck yeah. So I took that job, and I did that for about a year. And then he left and went back to Marriott, traditional Marriott, as a GM at a select service property. And so I was promoted from assistant ops manager to ops manager. I got the responsibility, but the senior leadership didn't think I was quite ready for a hotel manager title at the time, which is fine because it still was a great opportunity for me to learn and to demonstrate what I could do. And I did that all the way up until Katrina. And then Katrina happened, and we didn't have the wisdom that we have now. And so we were all in the hotel for Katrina. And so between the guests and the employees and all three properties within the building, we had about 1,000 people in the house. And that's a whole nother story for another discussion. Long story short, if we wanted to stay employed while the city was rebuilding, we needed to be willing to relocate. So I did. And I got the opportunity to do a task force assignment at the Naples Beach Resort. And it was awesome because I got to meet and work with Ed Starrose, who was Hort Schulte's right-hand man when they founded the Ritz-Carlton back in the 80s. This guy was part of writing the Credo card, the employee promise, the 3 steps of service, stuff like that, right? And so I got to really work with him, and that was phenomenal. And I did that for about 3 or 4 months. And then I went down to Coconut Grove, Miami, and I was running housekeeping and laundry down there for the rest of the year until we reopened the property here in New Orleans. Came back, reopened the property here as the director of housekeeping. That was a great experience. It gave me, opening experience and opening a hotel post-Katrina with the staffing challenges, and things that we're dealing with right now post-pandemic was, quite a challenge. But I learned a lot. And so by that time, I'd been with the company for about 6 years. Great experience, dormant director, but I felt like I reached the ceiling where I wasn't, growing anymore or as fast as I wanted to. And so I applied for the director of rooms position at the Lowe's Hotel, and I didn't get it, but you did, Jerry.
I did.
And, right. And what that did was it left your position open. And
Right.
So I went on to the W, where I got the director of housekeeping, but I also picked up some laundry responsibility and some light maintenance with the Browns. So again, it was more growth. And so I did that for about 1.5 years. And then the director of rooms position became available at the Sheraton Metairie. That was great. I went there, got my chance to, lead a full hotel renovation in the rooms division. And so I learned a lot there. I did that for about 3 years. And then the assistant general manager position became available at Wyndham Vacation Ownership. And that was awesome because while it still fell under the hospitality and tourism umbrella, it was a timeshare resort, which has a different business model, right? And not to dig too deep into that right now, but it was a great opportunity for me to see a different side of the business. And so I went ahead and I got that job, and I did that for about 3 years. And while doing that and learning from that side of the business, I also went back and got my degree. So, when I started as a doorman, I had some college, but I didn't finish at that time. So I went back and I finished when I was the assistant GM at Wyndham Vacation Ownership. I went to Tulane University, got my undergrad in social sciences. I graduated May 16th, 2015, and I was blessed to have a job offer from Oxford Health to become the general manager of the Brent House Hotel effective May 26th. And so I did that, and that was awesome because, again, hospitality and tourism, macro, but micro, I got an opportunity to work in what we call medical tourism. And so that was a totally different side of the industry. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it was a great experience. And so I did that for a while, and I ran into the infamous Dr. Chaco at the main campus, right? And Dr. Chaco encouraged me to go get my master's in hospitality and tourism management at the University of New Orleans. And quite honestly, I said, Doc, why do I want to do that? I'm already a GM. And he's like, Josh, believe me, you're gonna appreciate it. There's a lot more to it than what you know right now. And so I took his advice and I went and got the degree, and he was right. It gave me a much more global perspective to our industry, and it really helped me to understand the why behind what we do, right? And to become a better teacher and ultimately a better leader. And so I did that. And again, I started to get the itch. I wanted more growth and development, but then the pandemic hit. And so, I stuck with Ochsner at the Brent House for another year plus. And I was interested because we were ground zero pretty much, at that main campus. And so there's a lot that happened. And again, we can talk about that later. But as we started to come out of the pandemic, opportunities started to present themselves. And the opportunity here at the Pontchartrain Hotel presented itself. And I thought it was a perfect fit for me. So I'm a New Orleans native, and I really love, our culture. And when I think about the Pontchartrain Hotel, I think this hotel really embodies the culture like very few hotels in the city. And then when I learned more about the management company and how the management company is really growing at a rapid pace, that really intrigued me. And when I learned about the ownership company and how, their countercultural approach, I was like, man, this is a really good opportunity. And so I put my name in the hat, and thankfully I got the job, and this is where I'm at.
That's an amazing path, an amazing story. And Ramon, I'm sure will highlight, you guys have some similar starts or an identical start in having started as a doorman in this industry. But I appreciate the passion that you had when you started in this industry and the drive. And it was interesting to hear how some of that drive was not only driven by passion for you, passion for the industry, but motivation to seek growth. Given the circumstances in your life at the time, passing away of family members and that drive, that's something I definitely appreciate, because we're all driven by different things. And it seems like you had kind of dual drives. One of the other things that I found interesting, and you talked about it, you and I met pretty early in that process when you replaced me at the W New Orleans. And I remember meeting you. And I remember you coming over and you saying, hey, you talked to me about the fact that you had applied for the position and then I left and so on and so forth. But you talked about your growth, your desire even to continue growing at the time, even though you had just kind of started there at the W, you were already looking at what was next. And I think that that's something that should be appreciated. You are where you are today because you set goals. And once you reach one goal, you look to the next one. So kudos to you for doing just that.
Thank you, Jared. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, Josh, this Ramon, congrats. I think you have a great track record and it's something to be applauded. I'll tell you that listening to you talk through your journey brought back memories for me, because as Jerry pointed out, we had a similar start. I started off as a doorman, and I tell everybody this story. I probably was the youngest doorman in the city, but I was very hungry. And it seems like you were too hungry, driven. As Jerry pointed out, you reach one goal, you immediately set the next one. And this industry affords you the opportunity to be able to do that if you work hard. And I tell everyone, you give 100% of what you're doing today, but you make it very known that you have other goals and that you're driven. But you not only raise your hand and say it, but then you show it in your work. And I think that's where those opportunities come to people, is when you really do show it in your work and just have a passion to do what we do. And so, kudos to you. I mean, I think that the story that you, the journey that you've been through is certainly one that I hope would be an example to others in terms of how to really set a path and just keep it moving. Funny though, that all three of us, Jerry, you and I, all held the same role in the same hotel. And that's how small this industry is. Exactly. And certainly how small the city of New Orleans is, because before Jerry was director of housekeeping at the W New Orleans, I was the director of housekeeping. And,
I replaced him.
Yeah, he replaced me and then you replaced him. And so it's interesting that we're having this conversation, and we probably can talk stories about that building. I grew up in that building within this industry. My journey, I was a doorman in that building when it was a 4 Points. And guess what? My next role right after doorman was front office supervisor, just like you, in that same building though. And then my first management role, whatever manager, was in that building, then director of front office, then director of housekeeping. And so my growth came in that building over 3 brands. It was a Crown Plaza, then a 4 Points, then a W. Thinking back to my experience there and hearing about your journey, the only difference is all of my growth, similar path, but most of my growth was in that one same building right there. But man, it was wonderful for you to take us through that and honestly take me back a little bit.
Look, I got to tell you guys, I've always been inspired by both of y'all. Oh, and I tell people that all the time. It seems like from the outside looking in, Ramon, you mentioned it, being at the W, I felt like maybe you were a step ahead of Jerry, and Jerry was a step ahead of me. And, right? And but it always was that healthy motivation. Yeah. To see you guys do what you were doing, I knew that I could do it. And so just want to put that out there.
It's awesome to hear, and I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think all of us, we hope to be an inspiration for others. And as we as we do, or as we are blessed and fortunate to grow, we always look to reach back and help others grow with us. But that also comes through really sharing our stories. And that's why I think it's important for people to know your story and certainly hear a little bit about ours too, so that they can see, hey, look, this can be you, this can be anyone. I remember when I was a doorman, and approaching the GM, and you mentioned making tips
Doing the
during Super
same. Yeah.
Bowl. I walked up to my GM one day and I said, look, I'm probably the youngest doorman in the city. I'm making more money than anyone my age probably should be making in tips right now. But I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to grow and I want to cross train to be able to achieve that growth. And his exact words were, go for it. And so people like I was and you were back then, and Jerry certainly need people to sort of mentor and support them, but also just to give them a shot, and make sure that you open those doors for others. And that's part of what this podcast is too, is to put those stories out there, but also take people that are doing a fantastic job and just need to be put on a pedestal, allowing the opportunity for them to tell their story so that others are inspired by it as well, and that they achieve more growth through that process of sharing their story.
But your story
Absolutely.
is commendable, Josh, and you talked about being inspired by us. Listening to your story here is inspiring as well. And
Yeah.
honestly, it sounds almost identical to to ours.
Yeah.
And that's something that while each of us individually we don't see it or hear it the same way others do, as Ramon mentioned, others are going to listen to your path and your story, and hopefully that will be a moment where they see, oh, well, this path is also something that could be available to me. I just need to get my start, get my foot in the door, and be driven, be hungry, talk about it, seek guidance, seek the support, and it can happen. So,
Yeah.
but again, kudos to you for the path that you've had, and the career that you've had up to now. And as you continue to grow, I think that it'll also be something that continues to inspire others around you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, well,
Appreciate it.
look, I know we hit on housekeeping a little bit, and the fact that it is funny that all three of us held the same role in the same building. That is the heartbeat of any hotel. That department holds the burden of the largest payroll expense, also holds the burden of the largest team typically. And you can swing the hotel one way or the other, depending on how you, as a leader of that department, lead that department, how effective you are, frankly. So, how do you feel your time leading in such just a crucial department contributed to your overall success? I've appreciated every moment that I spent in housekeeping, even as I've grown as a general manager. And I look back to that experience and say, I'm able to be more successful today based upon this experience and my learnings in housekeeping. So how do you feel, that time in housekeeping contributed to your overall success as a GM today, and also your approach to leadership today?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it takes a special type of leadership style and skill to effectively lead a housekeeping department. I mean, let's call it what it is. We're talking about people that are probably working the hardest in the building, for sure, physically, and they're often the least paid. They're often the least recognized externally. And so when we think about TripAdvisor reviews, for example, a lot of the front of the house is typically going to get the recognition, whereas housekeepers are often not. And so when you talk about really motivating, that team, and really, keeping their morale high so that they can do, what it is that they do. Again, we have our guests have high expectations, and a lot of those expectations fall directly on the shoulders of the housekeepers and the housemen that support them and everyone else, in that department. And so just really being able to tap in, and meet them where they are, and really seek to understand, what it is that they're going through, and what type of support that they need, what type of resources do they need, what type of training do they have, their tools, like all of those things. I think just from a emotional intelligence perspective, you develop so much of it leading a housekeeping department. But to your point, outside of the engagement component, you start to talk about the guest satisfaction and also the financial implications, right? From a guest satisfaction perspective, guests are going to spend a healthy amount of their time in the guest room. right? And so if the product is not like new, if it's not really clean, if it doesn't feel good, if it doesn't smell good, that's going to have such a huge impact. Even the first impression when they walk in, if the place doesn't look clean, if it doesn't feel clean, if it doesn't smell good, it's going to have a huge, impact, right? And so, and that's not easy. So when you talk about just really making sure that you have a high quality product, there's a lot that goes into training and consistency. And so when we talk about the W, for example, and just Starwood in general, one of the things that I really appreciated about that company was the ABCs of housekeeping. And I still reference that, to this day. And for those who may not be familiar with it, it's a standardized approach to make sure that the room is cleaned in a systematic manner to achieve consistency. And so if I'm a long-term guest, for example, and I've got two different housekeepers cleaning my room because they have to have days off, and one housekeeper decides to put the towels over here, but the other housekeeper puts the towels over there, right? Mm-hmm. Something that minor, can really irritate the guest, right? And so, or if we're talking about from a financial perspective, again, housekeeping is often the largest department in the hotel, for sure in the rooms division. And when you talk about just productivity and controlling labor and par levels, and right, you've got to be really effective and efficient while also not having a negative impact on the quality of the product. And so there's a lot that goes into that, establishing proper par levels, having proper systems in place, training your folks so that they can achieve the productivity goals. All of that, is going to lead to really controlling your variable cost and increase, your GOP for your ownership. And so, now as a GM, when I'm looking at controlling, doing just that, right, flexing up and down my variable cost based on what's going on from a top line perspective, a lot of that knowledge and skill and insight I learned in housekeeping. Yeah. So, I mean, that I think that I'm so very thankful that I had the opportunity to go through that department for so many different reasons. And, I invite anyone who's aspiring to, to grow in this industry, if they have not already, served in housekeeping, it's really in their interest to do so.
Yeah, you're right. I tell you, I tell everyone that affords me the opportunity to at least, chat with them or mentor them, you want to spend time in housekeeping. You want that to be part of your journey because you will appreciate it so much. Two things that come to mind when I think about my time as director of style or director of housekeeping with the W, ABCs of housekeeping, as you mentioned, and the 4 deadly sins. Boy, I tell you, those things were, those were religion for us, but because they were basic fundamentals that if you can get those right, you are going to be successful. And then the other aspect of it was just leading the team through that. And I think that, people, just to hit on the point a little bit more that you made, if you can inspire someone that's doing the most difficult job within the hotel, but also still the most important job in the hotel in a way where you could be successful and have a high morale and just a highly engaged team and housekeeping in particular, you can do anything. I tell people that all the time, and especially in the city of New Orleans, because we're afforded a fair amount of challenges. There was no day when you walked into housekeeping where it was like the last, and usually by the end of the day, you left feeling like, wow, I accomplished so much. I got through that day, because you get thrown so many different whammies. And so it is it should be part of everyone's path if you want to grow, in my opinion, because you can hone in on some leadership skills. I tell everyone all the time, you need 2 things to be successful. You need sound management skills. You need to be successful and good at that. And that's the checklist side of your job, right? But the leadership skills are also needed. And they're 2 very different and important aspects of really being successful, I think, in this industry. But because for leadership, for me, I mean, how do you motivate your associates to do their job because they want to, not because they have to, because you're going to get better productivity, better results that way. And when I think of housekeeping, that is, so true. I mean, you need those team members to be highly engaged. You're going to get a better product. You mentioned first impressions. When you walk in that room, you want that bed to look like you can just bounce a pin off of it, because it is the largest piece of furniture, and you want the room to smell good. And so you just become a perfectionist at how to push those buttons and motivate every single one of those individuals in their own special way. I remember, many of the ladies that I was fortunate to work with, and there was nothing I would ever ask them to do that I wouldn't do myself. And you probably had days like this as well, and Jerry had them as well too, where unfortunately you're short bodies. And there were days where if I gave, some people may know this, but at the W New Orleans, on average, 23 rooms per floor. If I gave my ladies, unfortunately, more credits than and sometimes a whole floor because of varying reasons, then guess what? I gave myself a board too. And I was up there with them. Now, I more often was fortunate because I'm slow. I make a mean bed, make a fantastic bed, but my process is a lot slower than these professionals and how great they are at their roles. More often than not, before I can get through 4 or 5 rooms, most room attendants had come to me and says, "Ramon, you don't have to do that. Come on, give me some of those rooms off your board." And not that I wanted to give them those rooms, but that's one of those things that when you do see that you have hit home when it comes to leadership, you see people that are highly engaged, that even in the midst of those tough days, they would come and say, "Give me more. I want to do more. I want to be more loyal." Most people are loyal to the leaders that they work with, as opposed to the building, the name that's on the building. Again, you want to reach that level of success, and you don't learn that and appreciate that until you've paid your dues through housekeeping. And so kudos to you and spending your time and explaining it so eloquently in terms of why people should go through, have a path through within the rooms division through housekeeping.
Josh, a couple of things, and I've got our next question here, but I've got a couple of things I want to touch on that you touched on as well that I think were really important. And you used the phrase "meet them where they are," and I really, really identify with that. Ramon does as well. That's one of the skills that I think that you either, if you don't go into housekeeping with it, you're going to come out with it, because you have to meet everybody where they are. But the benefit of that is that in housekeeping, we have so many people that come from so many different backgrounds, so many different lifestyles, that we have to meet them where they are in order to ensure their success as well as our success. And coming out of housekeeping and transferring that skill to any other department, and then also as a general manager, transferring that skill to every department when you interact with them, is something that's so beneficial. Having gone through housekeeping, I really believe that is something that that benefits those that are in housekeeping, but also transferring that skill to any other area is something that is beneficial. And you also talked about kind of ABCs of housekeeping, and Ramon mentioned the deadly sins. And I remember, short story here, I remember when I started at the W New Orleans, I started there literally a week before Katrina. Ramon left, and he left me with this property as my first role as a housekeeping director. And he did have to spend about a week with me, or 3 days or so, I think. And
that was probably the only time in our career that we
worked together. The only time that we worked together. But so I spent so people had some a lot of people were doing double takes those 3 days at the W New Orleans, seeing both he and I in the same building. But of course, the first thing I learned was ABCs of housekeeping and the deadly sins. And I got to apply those because, of course, Katrina, there was no employee that came back immediately. And we immediately opened the property. We were open for business. We had 3 insurance adjusters, companies that were in-house. And I remember vividly that it was just Michael Baldinger, as you mentioned, and myself. We were the only 2 people cleaning rooms to start. I literally had to use the ABCs of housekeeping as my only guide on making sure that I did everything that I had to do in the rooms, and it helped. And as Ramon mentioned, I mean, I was slow. I mean, when it started, I was slow. But I'll tell you what it did, though, is that by the time, let's fast forward 2 months after that, after having been the only 2 people, and then maybe we had 1 or 2 people start coming back, but I was still cleaning rooms every day. But it gave me a deep and profound appreciation for what the team does in housekeeping. And I so appreciate that time. It was hard. It was difficult. I will not say it wasn't. but it gave me a profound appreciation for everything that every room attendant does, and every team member in housekeeping in general does. But it also prepared me for when all of those team members started to come back, those associates started to come back. I was better prepared. I knew what needed to be done. I knew what could be done. I knew what couldn't be done, what was realistic from an expectation perspective and what wasn't. So the time in housekeeping, again, for me, for all of us, obviously may have started off different, but we all benefit from it and then transfer those benefits onto other areas. Mo mentioned it, you mentioned it. We cannot highlight that enough, that the benefits of housekeeping and the value that should be there in housekeeping can never be something that's underestimated. So moving on to the next question here, and this is an interesting one for me. There's so many segments of hospitality, right?
Right.
You mentioned early on during your introduction that you had the good fortune to work in medical tourism. My
Yes.
brother and I have not, and so I think that is something we'd like to hear a little bit more about. You've been fortunate to work there. Tell us a little bit about how you applied some of your past experience within sort of the normal, I don't want to call it cookie cutter within hotels, but hotel environment. How were you able to apply that experience during your time with the Brent House?
For sure. So it's twofold. I guess, what I've been able to apply, and then also what I was also able to get in return, right? And so when we think about what we do in hospitality and tourism, I mean, providing, service, right? Attention to detail, personalized service for our guests is what we do. And, everyone, all of our guests deserve, for us to roll out the red carpet for them, for us to really pamper them, if you will. But when you talk about medical tourism and the demographic that you're serving, right? And we'll talk about the Brent House specifically. And so Oxnard Health has a hub and spoke model. And what I mean by that is the main campus is the hub, and you've got like community hospitals throughout the community that are spokes, right? And so they're the largest private employer in the state. And if you need to see a specialist and you're in a different community, you get referred to the hub, the main campus, right? And so there's a lot of folks coming in from throughout the region, but also that organization serves a lot of international patients that are coming predominantly from Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Latin America. And they're all traveling for healthcare. And so when they travel for healthcare, they need lodging accommodations, right? And so hence the Brent House Hotel. Yeah. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the ancillary business, if you will. And so with that, again, you've got patients that are traveling for healthcare. Many of them are coming to receive transplants, like Austria's #1 in liver transplant. They may be waiting to receive their transplant, and then they're staying with you at the hotel, and then they may go and get their transplant, right? And then they're healthy enough to be discharged, but not healthy enough to go home, and so they're staying at your hotel again until they're healthy enough to go home, right? Or you've got family members that are coming, from around the region to visit their loved one who's been transferred, to the hospital. Or you've got people right here in the city who have in many cases, it's tough, children that are in critical, shape, and their parents are there. And so when you talk about people who really deserve to be pampered and who really need that service, it's that patient demographic, right? Or that family member. Exactly. And so, we took a lot of pride in providing this service, to those guests. And that was like the direct, but even like beyond that, right? I mean, every organization is looking for a competitive advantage. And so service, right, is always going to be a competitive advantage. In healthcare, they understand what we bring to the table from a service perspective. And so outside of just the Brent House Hotel, like towards my latter tenure with that organization, and myself and one of my peers who I used to work with, again, back at the Ritz, we started to work on a larger service culture initiative for the division. And ultimately, I think it's going to evolve into to benefit the organization as a whole. And we leveraged a lot of the best practices that came from the hospitality and tourism industry, and we brought it there, and so, the difference, I guess, working in healthcare versus traditional hospitality and tourism is healthcare is a very academic, almost corporate type of an environment, right? And so they just approach the business a little bit differently. There's a lot more meetings, there's a lot more strategy. Not to say that doesn't happen in hospitality and tourism, but typically that happens in the corporate office, and then it's pushed down to the properties, right? Well, there it's kind of like the property is sort of the corporate office, and so it's, you know, there's a lot more of that going on in the day, for the day, in the week, in the period, for the period. And so I think what I was able to take from that, now that I'm back in the traditional, you know, luxury and upscale boutique hotel environment, is that, you know, that strategic approach, right? And to be able to couple that with, you know, what we learned at the master's program at UNO, and also what we talked about with, you know, Six Sigma and so on and so forth. And so I think, and so my chief HR officer here, we were talking after I got hired, and he was saying that, you know, I think we all understand what we're doing. Some folks understand how to do it, but a lot of people need help to understand why we do it, right? And so
exactly.
The whole Simon Sinek approach, right? And so with taking the what I got from working in medical tourism / healthcare was that approach, and being able to bring that back, you know, to the traditional industry, I think it really gives me a unique perspective, if you will, on how to approach what it is that we do. Just one more thing about the Brent House, though. So again, you guys know I'm competitive, right? And so, you know, being there and being inside the organization, I knew what we did, but if you were not in that organization, a lot of our peers in the larger hospitality and tourism community maybe didn't appreciate it as much, right? It was kind of like that hospital hotel, quote unquote, right? And so, you know, I took it personal. You know, I wanted to like do everything that I could to really elevate the profile of the Brent House Hotel, you know, and to try to really, you know, within our industry, to let it be known, you know, what we do in terms of like the service component, but also even from a profitability component. So again, going back to healthcare, that's a not-for-profit, you know, business model. And many of the traditional service lines within that system run at a loss. And so then there's an expectation that other businesses generate margin to offset those losses so the organization can continue to be sustainable and grow, right? And so the hotel was one of those businesses. And so if you were to look at like they call it like the patient mix, or for us, it'd be like market segmentation, right? So like Sunday through Thursday, the market segment was all, you know, medical driven, and there are various segments in that, right? But Fridays and Saturdays, because we're in New Orleans, right? And I mean, it's, you know, prior to the pandemic, that, you know, so we positioned ourselves really well. We optimized our website to really go after the leisure transient market and I work, you know, again, healthcare. So I had like 0.5 of a sales FTE over there. So like a lot of the sales fell on my shoulders on the revenue drive. So I had to work closely with like the OTAs. And so, I mean, it was beneficial in so many ways. I mean, I was really thankful for my opportunity that I had when I was there. And again, it just gives me a unique perspective, you know, and so I was very proud of the work that I did when I left. You know, my senior vice president, he was always a very good guy. He always looked out for me. He sent me a really nice note, and he said just what I said. He thanked me for really elevating the profile of the Brent House Hotel, and I'm proud that I was able to work with that team to do just that.
Man, I tell you, that's awesome. Great to hear, you know, how that experience added value for you and how much you added value to that property. I think every step of our journey does that. And the important part is to make sure that you identify what you're taking away from that experience and apply it to the next.
Absolutely.
Just to echo that a little bit, I one of the things that I appreciate most about our industry is the ability and the opportunity for us to be part of making people happy, serving others, as Ramon mentioned. At the Brent House, in that environment, I would think that the interactions are that much more rewarding.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, all of us, man, we're servant leaders, right? And that's what we do. And it's very gratifying. You know, again, whether we were talking a lot about housekeeping, it's a humbling experience when you're dealing with the workforce and housekeeping. And it's gratifying when you, to your point, Jerry, when, you know, when you feel like you've truly inspired them and they want to work, you know, and help you. And it's the same thing, you know, with our guests. You know, when we come to work every day and we really want to put them first, you know, and really meet or exceed their expectations. And again, going back to Brent House, you know, there were good times, but there were also bad times. And one more shout out, you know, my assistant GM over there, you know, she used to she would bring her family in and on Thanksgiving Day, and we would serve like, you know, a Thanksgiving meal to allow them to stay there, because again, they're traveling and they're away from, you know, from their families, often coming from different parts of the country or different countries, and you know, and they can't do a whole lot of traveling or getting away. And it wasn't anything, it wasn't a 5-star meal, believe me, right? But it was just the fact that, you know, that we were taking our time to, you know, really to do that. They really appreciated it. And I think that more than them appreciating it, we felt good that we were able to do that. So
Yeah.
shout out to Kimberly Freeze. Her and her family did a great job with leading that initiative.
That's fantastic.
Be able to piggyback on.
No, look, that's amazing, and I'm glad you sent that shout out to Kimberly. I've obviously met her and interacted with her, and she shares our passion for the industry as well. So definitely shout out to her. You've now moved on to a new role, and you'll have the opportunity to apply a lot of those things. And congratulations to you on your success so far. Congratulations to you on this new role at the Pontchartrain Hotel. And I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight that that is an amazing property, a property that has been doing so well. And I can only imagine as we work to come out of this pandemic, you're going to help take it on to new heights. Really one of those properties that embodies service and also a uniqueness to it that is attractive, that is sexy, and that also is New Orleans. So it kind of really touches on all of those aspects. So they're lucky to have you, and I'm sure that you're going to do a great job there. And you've had great success up to now. And as I mentioned, I'm sure you're going to continue to set new and bigger goals for yourself and reach those. But tell us a little bit about the challenges that you've encountered along the way. And you touched on some of those things already, but you know, we all have had our path, and we've all talked about how we've grown. But we all know, the three of us know, that it's not easy, right? There's those challenging moments. We'd love to hear a little bit more about those for you, and then how you work to overcome them.
With growth comes growing pains, right? And so, I mean, I can touch on a lot of them, but I think what's probably most appropriate for this discussion is, you know, when you're growing, whether you're going from one department to another, or one hotel to another, or one, you know, organization to another, right? I think, you know, we all, you know, kind of know what we're trying to do in terms of like goals and tactics. And then, you know, when you kind of move up a little bit higher on the food chain, then you start to focus a little bit more on the strategy. But when you move up even higher than that, really it's the culture, right? You know, there's that saying that, you know, the something about good companies have, you know, good tactics and good strategies, but great companies have great strategies and great cultures, right? And so when you move into these different roles, different hotels, different organizations, you get into different cultures. And so just like really trying to understand the norms, right? What's the saying? When in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? Well, you know, they're not all the same Rome, right? And so just like really trying to figure out what's the bigger play, if you will, right? Or what are the politics? And let me just pause on that for a second, because a lot of people get uncomfortable when you say politics. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean that purely from a like positioning and influence perspective. Right? And it's happening in every organization. And if you don't really understand the bigger play, if you don't understand the positioning, the influence, if you don't understand the priority and the reason behind it, right? And it really the cultural norms that lead into the strategy that ultimately is going to dictate the goals and the tactics and how we execute, you may find yourself in a very frustrating situation, right? Because what you're trying to do may not align with what is in the bigger scheme of things. And so, you know, just really being able to get in and again, if you're in our role, you got to hit the ground running, right? I mean, you're the leader. So it's not like you can really just sit back and just like, you know, get a whole bunch of study time. You got to kind of hit the ground running and still figure out what's going on at the same time. And so in doing such, it took me a while to really understand the whole culture component and the strategy component. Early on in my career, I was focused a lot more on the goals and the tactics. And I would get frustrated because I was so passionate and I was so driven and I wanted to do this. And how could they not understand? And why are we not doing this, right?
Yeah.
And it was because that wasn't necessary. All things are important, but not everything is as urgent, right? Or if there's the whole 20 to the 80 principle that you got 100 different things going on, and you can focus on 80 of them and be very busy spinning your wheels, but not make a whole lot of progress. Or you can focus on that 20% that really has a big impact, and you nail that, and it's like a domino effect. It knocks everything down, right? And so if you don't really take the time to learn and understand what's going on from a strategic perspective and from a culture perspective, you may find yourself spinning your wheels and just getting frustrated. And I did a lot of that early on in my career. And I bumped my head and kept bumping my head and bumping my head. And then eventually the light bulb started to go off, right? And every time, I learned a little bit more, it led to a little bit more growth, and then I would run into, I would kind of max out at that level and bump my head a little bit more, and then the light bulb would go off and it leads to a little bit more growth, right? And so every time that I was able to take a step forward, it kind of allowed me to see the bigger picture, if you will. And there's still a lot more for me to learn. But I think now, being in a general manager's position, the onus is more on me to teach my leaders who roll up to me the lessons that I learned, because I'm seeing them often, them bumping their heads like I used to bump my head, right? And it's just trying to get them to understand, again, they understand what we're doing. Some of them understand how to do it, but not everybody understands why we do it. And so, and again, the whole goal, strategy, culture. And so now just being able to teach that more is more of a challenge, but I'm up for it. And I find a lot of gratification when the folks that I'm leading, when they get it. Because when they get it, the light bulb goes off and bam, we're moving on to the next level,
I'm glad that you touched on the fact that we're going to have bumps in the road. We're going to bump our head, especially if we're passionate about something and we're chasing it, we're driving it. We're not perfect. We're going to learn as we make mistakes, and we're going to grow as we learn from those mistakes that we've made. And that's exactly what you highlighted. And I think that the other great point that you highlighted as well is that understanding why we do something versus just how we do it is critically important, because we can always teach somebody how to complete a task, and they can complete that task 100 times, 1,000,000 times, and be proficient at completing that task. But until they learn why we do what we do, they will never grow. We encourage people to ask that why, ask those questions, learn, especially when they're good at it. We want them to learn the whys so that they can seek what's next for them. As Ramon mentioned, reaching back and pulling them forward. We could always be content with having somebody who's good at what they do in their role. But it's the difference is made and the growth is found, not just for us, but for those individuals, when we really look to find ways to ensure that they capitalize on those learning opportunities and grow and find that next new adventure, hopefully coming with positive growth for them as well.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
And look, we've all been there as leaders, especially as you transition into new roles. I think back to similar experiences where you come in and you have to be that leader of change management. And so you hit on so many different aspects of how to do that in the most successful manner possible. So I appreciate you sharing that. As you think, about our industry today, I mean, we're coming out of this pandemic. I think there are a lot of great things on the horizon. We're feeling them. We see them in the metrics now and some of the analytics. But, what's your outlook on the future of hospitality?
I think it's great. I look at it like any market, right? If you're looking at a real estate market, stock market, as of late, crypto market, right? We're talking a job market here, or, particularly to our industry. And when you look, back historically, history repeats itself. And the majority of the growth happens after the crash, right? And so, when you look at even just within our industry here in the greater New Orleans area, you go back to the Great Recession, 08, 09, there was a lot of growth after that. Prior to that, when you go back to Katrina, there was a lot of growth after that. Prior to that, go back to 9/11, right? A lot of growth. And so, from an investor perspective, I would say I look at this like buying the dip, right? Now is a great time to get in because there's a lot, the upside. There's so much upside ahead of us. There's so much pent up demand. There's more people that want to travel and experience what we have to offer than the amount of labor that we have to provide the service, right? And so for the folks out there who are waiting to get back into the workforce, I would highly encourage them to do it now, because right now they've got the leverage. They can be more selective, to get at a hotel or at any, business within our industry for that matter, and pick one that's the best fit for what they bring to the table. And I think that's going to be great for all of us. We want people that are going to fit in with whatever organizational culture that we have. And now there's so much opportunity out there, for the labor side to do that. That's not going to always be the case. And what I mean by that is when we get like to the fourth quarter, let's take October, for example, it's going to be the first time we've got, all with both Jazz Fest weekends.
Oh, yeah.
You got Voodoo Fest, Fresh Quarter Fest, Buku Fest. I mean, every weekend is going to be jumping, right?
And football season.
So, by that time, I would think that, we're going to have a lot more people working in our industry by then. And so that, then the leverage it doesn't go in the employee's favor as much.
I agree with you so much. I think our industry, the future looks so bright. We see it, as I mentioned earlier, in the analytics. It's going to come back with a vengeance. And I want to highlight on sort of the employee piece that you mentioned. This is a great industry. It's an industry that if you listen to Josh's story, Jerry's story, my story, and one thing we should point out, we all had similar paths, started in line level positions, now are fortunate to lead hotels, and not the first hotel that we're leading. But, our paths were a little bumpy, but we were hungry, we were passionate. We started off in the industry, proved ourselves. Each of us, and we didn't point this out, went back to finish our degree. So that should be telling to folks. I think education is very important. You want to invest in yourself. We almost invested in ourselves from a career standpoint faster than we did education from an education standpoint, but we went back and finished it and got it done. All three of us participated in the master's program at the University of New Orleans and finished that as well. We have very similar, leadership sort of values that I think have contributed to our success. But the reality is that anyone could do this. Anyone could come in if you have the passion to do this, a passion to serve others, and you see yourself as being as a servant leader one day, then this is the industry for you. We have a great time at work. Not every day is easy, but I can tell you I leave every day feeling like I've accomplished a lot. I never wake up and regret getting up to go to work. I love what I do. And most people that work in this industry will tell you the same exact thing. I really want to thank you for sharing your story, your journey with us. I know Jerry mentioned this earlier. It's inspiring to hear. I know it'll be inspiring for others to hear, and hopefully for those that are thinking about coming into our industry, or they're already in our industry and don't see the growth path for them. Hopefully they see it in your story and it's an example for them and something that they can sort of pick up the torch and run with.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Josh today. During our conversation, we also talked a lot about Six Sigma. We recorded a special episode and we hope you take the time to tune in. And we look forward to you joining us on the next episode of the Hospitality Twins podcast.